this episode of TokStocks, our host speaks with Elmer Stewart, President and CEO of Copper Fox Metals. Why are we interested in talking copper? Because global copper demand is forecast to more than double by 2035. Copper Fox Metals has a portfolio of exploration and development stage copper projects. With that, let's jump in.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us today on the TokStocks Podcast, Elmer. Maybe you could just start off by introducing yourself to everybody and a little bit about your background.
Thank you. I'm the chairman, CEO, and president of Copper Fox Metals. We're a North American-focused copper exploration development company. A little background on myself. I have a master's degree in economic geology. I am a registered professional geologist in Alberta. I do qualify as a QP under National Instrument 43-101 in copper, gold, and uranium. I've been in the business for 48 years. I've been involved in a lot of domestic and international exploration, involved in the discovery of base metal mines and gold projects, involved in 5 gold mines, 3 of which we operated directly. So vast experience, and probably since 1987, I've been involved as a senior management in companies listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange and or the Venture Exchange. So a broad range of experiences across things. And
Great. Well, in your role here, you've been a long time sort of in the big seat there as CEO. Maybe you could just give us a little vantage point into what it's like in terms of like your leadership philosophy and what guides you in your decision making as a CEO of a public company.
First and foremost is being able to identify projects which you think has potential to meet the strategic needs of the corporation. The second is capital efficiency, because it's hard to raise money for juniors, especially when in the downside of a commodity cycle. And we're very much results driven. Yeah. So the idea is to spend $1 where we can get a $10 return on the value of the investment. And so essentially that's what drives it. We have the team around us that allows us to do that, and internally, and we also have a group of people, experts we deal with externally when we need their help.
All right. And, over the years of running the company and, mining's in favor and out of favor, we're obviously now in a very timely moment again where hard assets and commodities are almost strategic, especially as we're moving into this electrification and sort of like net zero sort of economy. But can you talk about maybe a particularly sort of challenging situation that you faced as a leader in your CEO role and how you had to navigate it?
The one that comes to mind is from 2012, and just before we completed the feasibility study on the Shaft Creek project, was that the commodities cycle turned over, and we went into a downturn in the commodity cycle, and it lasted until about 2017. And it was probably the worst commodity cycle on record for over 100 years. And that is one of the hardest things, is to keep the company moving forward, advancing the assets, but at the same time being in an environment where it's difficult to raise funding.
Right. I guess funding is probably the most important thing with moving the company. You got to sort of keep the dream alive and be able to advance the projects, and require capital. So you must have some pretty some friends with some deep pockets.
We're fortunate in Copper Fox. Our major shareholder the major shareholder has been primarily the main funder. He came in 2009. He came in the same time that I came into the CEO role at Copper Fox, and we forged a fairly good relationship. And the bottom line is he's always been there whenever the company needed money. He's been there. And also the management and board of directors has put a considerable amount of money into the company as well to keep it going through the more difficult years. So yeah, we have some fairly loyal shareholders as well who were there when the company needed funds to maintain its operations and to advance its projects.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. So why don't we sort of switch gears just for a moment and maybe talk a little bit about like the current market conditions for copper. Maybe you could give us a bit of an overview on those conditions and how you see them evolving in the future.
Well, if you look at 2022, in March, we hit an all-time high for copper of 2022. By July, we were down about 40%. By the end of the year, we had recovered that 40%. We're now trading probably in the 410 to 420 range. And the prognosis, the long-term prices of copper have moved up quite considerably in 2021, 2022. But the prognosis going forward for the low carbon economy, the green transition, and actually just physical supply and demand fundamentals, because some of the big producers, their production is off, and interestingly enough, we have very low inventories now in the LME and the SHIF. And there's a few fundamental changes in the market that would suggest to me that the copper market is tightening up. And so going forward, I think copper's the place where you want to be, and the overall sentiment is quite bullish on the copper space.
Well, that's great, and that sort of covers the next thing I was going to ask, which how do you see the demand for copper changing as the world shifts? You've already talked about it, so we're going to need a lot more. And the only way to do that, if the current producers are producing less, is we're going to have to bring some new mines on. Is that what you're saying?
It is. But this morning I read an article about just on electrical vehicles alone. They're thinking by the year 2030, we're going to need another 2 million tons of copper to just to meet that demand. Well, look at 2 million tons of copper. If you look at some of the largest copper producers in the world, and it's Escondida, it produces about 1 million tons of copper a year, I think. Maybe not so much now, but that means you're going to have to build 2 Escondidas between now and 2030. That's 7 years. I don't think we have 2 Escondidas to build, and I'm be very skeptical if you could build them in 7 years. So the industry has been talking about this for a long time. There's been a lack of investment. There's a very low inventory of advanced stage or development stage projects that can look at production. And so the issue is, going forward, my view is the supply side is going to have a problem, and the demand side will take care of itself.
So it sounds like we don't have enough for this new application for sort of just the electric vehicles alone, but are there any other sort of potential new markets or any applications for copper that investors should keep an eye out for?
Well, I think the new markets is in say like medical, athletic wear. Copper is infused in all these things, and it has, from what we're hearing so far, it's very effective in controlling bacteria and the spread of bacteria and things like that. No other markets for copper, they may develop. And as people keep looking, they probably will. But the big demand for copper is going to be the traditional uses, and this move toward the lower carbon green economy.
Right. How does your company plan to take advantage of the growing demand for copper that we're seeing due to this electrification and sort of net zero?
We have 2 development stage projects. One is a joint venture with Teck at Schaft Creek, and one is the Van Dyke In-situ recovery project in Arizona, which we own 100%. The last technical study done on both projects clearly indicated a number of project enhancements, which, if successful, could increase the overall value of the project. And we're not talking little increases; we're talking incremental increases that would be substantive. So our objective is to move the project to the stage where we would put that asset in play. Clearly, the demand going forward, clearly the projected price rise in copper is going to help us get closer and faster to our goal of putting an asset in play. It also allows the company the ability to raise funding and advance some of the other projects, like our advanced exploration stage project at Eaglehead, which is also located in northern British Columbia.
So could you unpack it a little bit more in terms of like what's the strategy for Copper Fox? Why should investors maybe have a look at your company as a way to play the surge in demand for copper over the coming years?
Yes. If you look at our portfolio, we have 5 projects in total, 2 of which are in the advanced stage, 1 of which is a joint venture with Teck. Now, a project the scale and size of Schaft Creek, my belief is you need a senior operator to develop those projects properly. The good news for Copper Fox is we don't have to put any money up, and we cannot get diluted out, which is a very, very pristine position for a junior to be in, especially when you're dealing with a major project. The in-situ copper recovery, the Van Dyke project, that is a project that we can advance to the preliminary feasibility stage, and we've already announced that we're doing that, and the work is on the go there. But if you look at the other assets we have, we have a number of other assets that can move forward. The other thing is, with demand going forward in the copper space, it's going to put supply up, and that all works through our strategy. The portfolio allows us to build a sustainable business, and the increase in copper prices and the enhancements are going to take those projects, the development stage projects, to a stage where you're going to say, okay, they're now in fair value territory. Then the board has to decide what is going to be the next step. And as we achieve getting these enhancements done, which hopefully will be done in the near term, and we'll see what the copper price is going to be, and that would be a big catalyst for Copper Fox to make a decision to put an asset in play.
And when you say sort of put an asset in play, does that mean through like a partnership or a collaboration?
It can go either way. I mean, we're open for business. I mean, preferably my preference would be to do a sale. However, on the other hand, it depends if the potential buyer wants to, if they want to do a joint venture, and we could perfect a joint venture like we have at Shaft Creek, because I'm a big believer in not taking all the risk and then all of a sudden just jumping into a joint venture arrangement with somebody, and you run the risk of getting diluted out. And that is a big risk for juniors. So if we were to look at a partnership, that's the kind of partnership we would look at. But our preference would be sale of the asset, disposition of most of the proceeds out to the shareholders by way of some form of a dividend.
Okay, so multiple ways to potentially benefit. Could you just run through again quickly, just summarize your projects from the ones that would be most important or have the, I guess, most developed all the way through? Could you just touch on those again quickly?
Yeah, I think the most developed one is obviously our interest in the Shaft Creek joint venture. That has come a long way under Tech's leadership, and we just put out some really good results, interesting results from the first phase of the drilling we did in 2022. We released 6 drill holes, and we got some near surface higher grade intervals inside the first 5-year pit, and that has a implied value in possibly increasing the value of the project, because the grades are higher. You should be able to produce more metal. If the metallurgical test work shows we can get higher recovery, we'll produce more metal, and more metal will shorten your payout period. It should increase your IRR after tax. So it's really important. Now, Van Dyke, we own that 100%. That's in a development stage project as well, and we're managing that. And those are the 2 advanced ones we have. And
where's the Van Dyke project?
It's in Arizona, and what I'm seeing right now is that there's a lot of companies out there looking for copper projects that are low carbon intensity, low water consumption, and that actually is exactly what Van Dyke is. And the thing is, they're not mining, you're not moving rock, you're just taking the copper out of those little fractures that was deposited when the porphyry was originally put in place and subsequently changed. And so the idea is there's no hole in the ground. It's a solutioning thing, and that's where it looks to me where midterm producers and some of the bigger producers are looking at toward going green, low carbon. And so, I think ISCR projects are going to be very, very important, become very important coming into the future. Now, the other projects we have are all porphyry copper systems. They're all going to be, if we can move them down the value chain, they're going to be pretty conventional truck and shovel flotation systems.
Sounds good. And the Van Dyke, what sort of stage is that at? Does it have like resources?
It has. It's got a resource. We did a resource in 2020. 1/3 of the resource is in the indicated category, which is about approximately 97 million tons. And about 160 million tons are in the inferred category. And that's the first time we were able to classify a portion of the resource at Van Dyke as indicated. Now, the work that we're going to be doing going forward will be to update bring more of the inferred resource up into the indicated, and maybe be able to move the indicated resource up into the measured classification. Because if we want to complete a feasibility, we're going to have to use measured indicated resources. So that would be the work we did.
So how many sort of total pounds, I guess, of copper would that be? What sort of grades are we looking at?
Well, it's the grade is probably in the order of about 0.23, 0.25% soluble copper. And the total copper content is in the order of about 1.2 to 1.3 billion pounds of soluble copper. And it's enough to support a mine life of 70 years, producing about 85 million pounds of copper a year. And like I said, it's early stage. We're at the preliminary economic assessment stage, but we have some really good technical information to support that. We got some really good external expertise working with us. And the deposit, from what we can tell, is open to the southwest. And we think the exploration target to the southwest is about 1.5 kilometers long. And we feel pretty comfortable about talking about being able to extend that. If it is, then that extension is as big as the existing deposit we have right now.
Wow, that sounds like a very interesting project that people should read more up on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the thing is, we when we printed that number, we were quite conservative on metal prices and other things, and I'll admit it's a preliminary economic assessment, but the after-tax value came in at like $144 million US. Wow. So it is the most valuable asset we have. No, Shaft Creek is quite valuable. We own 25% of that. But if you look at the net asset value of the company based on independent third-party reports, we have a net asset value of around about $850 million US, which when you look at the share price versus the NAV, there's a huge disconnect.
What's your market cap sitting at today?
Well, it moves up and down every day, but today is probably in the order of about $140 million range. It does vary day by day, but it's been going up steadily for the last few weeks, ever since we got through the holiday season. And I think it's a function of the storyline on the demand for copper. And
well, that's great. You've sort of touched on by talking about this type of deposit. Maybe you could just talk on the technology of it again, or what it's called, the Van Dyke.
Yes, the Van Dyke deposit I'm going to get a little technical here. It's a supergene deposit, and when the deposits in the Miami Globe area, there are 5 porphyry systems there, when it came in, it caused a huge zone of fracturing around the intrusive, and those fractures were filled up with copper sulfides. But over time and through weathering processes called supergene enrichment, these fractures are now been converted to soluble copper minerals like malachite, azurite, chrysocolla. And so what we're planning on doing, we've identified the resource. We think the resource can get bigger, but the plan is to recover, basically reverse the hydrothermal process that deposited the copper, use a different solution, but reverse that and recover the mineralization from those little fractures and those little quartz veins and those little breccia zones where the copper now resides. So essentially, there's no moving of the host rock, but you're just trying to get a solution to move along that vein, and the solution is very weakly acidic solutions, and move it along the vein and dissolve the copper, and from the injection well along the vein to the recovery well, take it to surface, recharge, take the copper out, recharge it, and recirculate that solution all the time. So you're trying to create a closed system so there's no solution flow outside the area in which you're currently working in. So it's actually unique because when you think about it, there's no open pit, very minimal amount of surface disturbance, low water consumption, very low carbon intensity per pound of copper produced, very little social impact the way we're anticipating going. We're staying away from any potential aquifers in the area. So I'm actually quite excited about moving this project to the preliminary feasibility stage.
Yeah, it sounds really unique. Are there some other copper mines that are using the same technology?
Yes.
And how does Van Dyke compare to those in terms of number of tons and grades?
Mm-hmm. There are 3 projects in Arizona, which I'm familiar with, which would be classified as in-situ recovery. One is the Florence, which is, I think it's permitted, because I know the operator there is actually doing production financing, and they're being very successful in getting that done. So it looks like they're going to go to production. And pretty much we modeled Van Dyke after that because of the engineers that worked there versus the engineers that helped us at Van Dyke. The other one is the Gunnison project in southern Arizona, and it has run into a few technical issues, and I hope they get those things worked out. But as far as size, our Van Dyke is slightly smaller in soluble copper content than the other ones. But like I said, we think we can expand the resource at Van Dyke. And if that whole 1.5 kilometers is mineralized, well, then potentially, and you got to demonstrate this, you could have twice as much soluble copper there, which would put it in the same category as the other companies. On a value basis, it's pretty close to the value on an after-tax value basis, pretty close to the value of Florence. Doesn't quite match up with the last technical report I've seen for the Gunnison. But the key thing is the geology at Van Dyke is the mineralization is all hosted in the Pinal schist and is covered by a leach cap, which is part of the supergene process. And we think that is fundamental because there are no carbonates, to our knowledge, in the Pinal schist, which is I think demonstrated by the fact that we're only consuming 1.5 pounds of copper of acid for every pound of copper we produce. So that we think is a technically advantage thing. And the other thing is we're coming in under the aquifers. We're not going to be disturbing the known aquifers in the area. And those aquifers, to our knowledge, the town of Miami, the town of Globe, those areas, those communities get their water from another watershed about 10 kilometers, 10, probably 15 kilometers, 10 miles further to the east. So we're designing the project to steer clear of all the issues that these other companies, these other projects have identified in their process toward working to getting the permits they needed to go into production.
Well, that sounds great. That project's got me pretty excited. I'm gonna look a lot more into that. Maybe you could. We've kind of covered a bit on that. What more generally? What are some of the future plans and growth catalysts that Copper Fox has sort of in the near term that investors who might be considering to take a position today might be able to look forward to?
Clearly, we're waiting for the final results from the Shaft Creek project to see if how the drilling played out there. We can continue to extend those high grade zones, and we're Tech's doing, in our opinion, a pretty good job of advancing that project, and they're executing on the enhancements. Our push is going to be on Van Dyke because we want to advance to the pre-feasibility stage because we think that we have the ability to add a significant amount of value there, and at the same time we have the flexibility of remaining open to do corporate transactions, whatever is the results determine we go forward. We want to advance the Eaglehead project. We want to do a little bit of work on all of the other projects just to take them to the next stage. You don't spend a lot of money, but it's the next technical stage that's required. So yeah, 2023 should be an exceptional, an interesting year for Copper Fox as far as corporate developments go and being able to, to add value.
That's probably pretty good there, Elmer. Anything else you want to cover?
No, it's just that, what else can I say, Kira? I'm quite excited about 2023. I'm excited about where we're at. I'm excited about the forecast for copper going forward. Clearly, if you look at all our projects, it's metal price dependent, and they really drive the value. And, we've used such low prices in our PEA at Shaft Creek and at Van Dyke. If you brought those up to current metal prices today, the value has gone up considerably. And that's not lost on the industry. That's not lost on people who are out there looking around for assets. They know that. And I'm seeing a fundamental shift right now where companies that used to have a certain threshold before they would look at a project, well, they brought that threshold down quite considerably in the last year or two. And the number of companies that were traditionally not in the copper space and they're now looking to put together a portfolio of copper assets in North America, it's actually quite exciting, and it's interesting to see that shift into the copper space. And when you think about it, the big guys, the producers, they must have a very substantive reason as to why they want to get into the copper space.
Well, I guess copper traditionally is related to like development and infrastructure. It tends to be when like the economies are doing well. So China has been in a severe. They had a COVID zero policy lockdown for forever, and they've sort of come out of that. So is that driving some of the interest? Is that with them coming online and opening up, being back open for business, that that could be one of the drivers here of the copper price? What do you think?
I think it is. I think that's part of it. If you look at some of the things that was going on in China during toward the end of 2022, they were restocking quite substantially. Clearly, I think one of the biggest issues is that the TCRC charges the benchmark was set at 88, and that number now is in the high 70s, which means to me that the copper space is tightening up quite substantially. And irrespective of whether China is looking for more, it looks like other parts of the world are looking for more because the premium countries are prepared to pay higher premiums. There might be some headwinds given the fact that we've got this inflation going on, high interest rates. But the thing is, the world needs more commodities, and you've got to invest with a 5 to 7 year lead time, and that's just the build time. And even if these forecasts are half correct on the total copper demand going forward for the next 10 years, the next 15 or 20 years, the fundamental issue is we don't have deposits at the stage right now that could go into production unless, of course, economics was pushed aside, geopolitical issues were pushed aside, and they all started now, and there would be no disruption to them as they go forward. Then, clearly you probably could supply enough copper, but we all know all those things are never going to come together and to not interfere with it. Because you take a look at what's going on in Panama right now with First Quantum. You take a look at the social unrest in Peru. Look what the EPA just did to Pebble in Alaska. I mean, the governments are talking one story, but the reality is completely different. And that is going to have an impact on copper supply going forward and other commodities as well.
Great. Why should investors consider investing in Copper Fox?
The portfolio of projects we have a substantial resources in the ground of copper, gold, molybdenum, and silver. We have a very high net asset value based on independent reports, and we are moving ahead in the copper space, a critical metal, and the copper outlook space going forward looks pretty robust.
Okay, great. Could you let investors know what near-term catalyst Copper Fox has coming down the pipe?
Right now, I see about 2 or 3. One is going to be the drill results from Shaft Creek. The second is going to be the 2023 program, which we're anticipating seeing toward the end of February, and how we're going to be able to advance our Van Dyke project along the path to completing a preliminary feasibility study.